Hello friends, welcome to my channel. This is Abhirami and I am here to discuss with you about today's topic, that is development of blood vessels. And today I will be talking about the aortic arches. Before I start about the aortic arches, I will give you an introduction about pharyngeal arches. Pharyngeal arches are present in the embryo and they project towards the face and the neck. They can be seen on the neck region. In the fishes, the pharyngeal arches will develop to form skeleton which will support the gill slits, and also it forms the jaw and the hyoid bone. So like I said, the pharyngeal arches will give rise to skeletal structures, and it also gives rise to the connective tissues in the head and the neck region. And the pharyngeal arches are supplied by some arteries called as the pharyngeal arch arteries or the aortic arches. So the arteries that supply the pharyngeal arches are called as pharyngeal arch arteries or aortic arches, and these aortic arches will become the major arteries of the heart after complete development. The aortic arches are present in the mesenchyme of the pharyngeal arches. Mesenchyme is the undifferentiated connective tissue present in the embryo. So the aortic arches are present inside the mesenchyme of the pharyngeal arches, and they supply the pharyngeal arches. They also connect the ventral aorta to the dorsal aorta. So you might be thinking from where there are two aortas. I will explain that in the next slide. The development of the blood vessels is starting on the 4th week of intrauterine life, and initially the development of the blood vessels is symmetrical. So there will be an aorta on the left side and an aorta on the right side. So since both these aorta are present dorsal to the foregut, they are called as the right and left dorsal aorta. And during cephalocaudal folding, a small part of the dorsal aorta will come to the ventral part and form the right and left ventral aorta. The cardiovascular system is the first system to reach the functional state. That means the cardiovascular system is the first system to start functioning in the body. The pharyngeal arches will start their development by the 4th or the 5th week of the intrauterine life, and the blood vessels develop by the 4th week. And the heart also begins to beat by the 21st or the 22nd day, and blood begins to circulate. So in this diagram you can see that there is a dorsal aorta on the left and the right side, and a ventral aorta on the left and the right side. The dorsal aorta and the ventral aorta are connected together by the aortic arches, and the aortic arches lie in the mesenchyme of the pharyngeal arches. There are 6 aortic arches and there are 6 pharyngeal arches. Each aortic arch supplies the pharyngeal arch, and the 5th aortic arch will disappear. As you can see, it's already thin in the diagram. The 5th aortic arch will be the first to disappear, and the dorsal aorta will join at the caudal end to form the descending aorta. So in the development of the heart, we read about the two primitive heart tubes. The right and the left ventral aorta become continuous with the two primitive heart tubes. And during the fusion of the two primitive heart tubes, they form the truncus arteriosus, which is the arterial end of the heart. And also after the fusion of two primitive heart tubes, the right and the left ventral aorta also get fused. But they don't get fully fused, they only get partially fused. The fused part is called the aortic sac, and the unfused part forms the right and the left horn of the aortic sac. The picture on the left side shows how the ventral aorta is continuous with the primitive heart tube, and also the dorsal aorta and the ventral aorta are connected by the first aortic arch. And the picture on the right side shows how the dorsal aorta is dorsal to the foregut and the ventral aorta is ventral to the foregut, and they are connected by the first aortic arch artery. In this picture, it's shown that the two heart tubes will fuse together and they form truncus arteriosus, which is the arterial end of the heart, and after that the two ventral aorta will fuse together to form the aortic sac, and the unfused parts form the right and the left horns of the aortic sac. And then after that the ventral aorta and the dorsal aorta are connected together by the first aortic arch. As I already told before, the pharyngeal arches has its own supply, that is its own aortic arch, and so there are 6 pairs of aortic arches, out of which the 5th pair will degenerate very quickly. In this diagram you can see that the aortic sac will give rise to the 5 aortic arches, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 6. The 5th one will degenerate, so it will give rise to 1, 2, 3, 4 and 6, and these aortic arches will connect with the dorsal aorta. Now out of the first, second, third, fourth and sixth aortic arches, now let's talk about the first and the second arch arteries. So the first aortic arch will also degenerate, and its remnant will be a part of the maxillary artery, and the second aortic arch will form the hyoid and the stapedial arteries. The hyoid and the stapedial arteries will cease to exist after the fetal life is over, that is, they will not be present in the adult. The stapedial artery is present in the middle ear, and you would have heard of the bone stapes, which is the smallest bone in the body. So this stapes is also present in the middle ear. Before we talk about the third, fourth and the sixth aortic arches, let me tell you something about the spiral septum. The spiral septum is a structure present in the truncus arteriosus, and it divides the aortic sac in such a way that the third and the fourth aortic arches can open into the ventral part of the aortic sac, and the sixth aortic arch will open into the dorsal part of the aortic sac. And also the blood from the ascending aorta will enter the third and the fourth aortic arches, and the blood from the pulmonary trunk will open into the sixth aortic arch. So the third and the fourth aortic arches will open into the ventral part of the aortic sac, and the sixth aortic arch will open into the dorsal part of the aortic sac. So in this diagram on the left side, you can see that the first and the second aortic arches have disappeared. They will form the maxillary artery. The first one will form the maxillary artery, and the second one will form the stapedial artery and the hyoid artery, both of which will not exist in the adult. And you can also see that the aortic sac is divided into a ventral part and a dorsal part. You can see that the ventral part is connected to the third and the fourth aortic arches, and the dorsal part is connected to the sixth aortic arch. So now let's talk about the changes that happen in the third aortic arch. We all know that the carotid sheath is present in the neck region, and it carries the common carotid artery, which will divide into the external carotid artery and the internal carotid artery. Here the third aortic arch is the one that gives rise to all 3 arteries. So how does this happen? In the middle of the third aortic arch there will be an outgrowth, and this outgrowth will develop to form the external carotid artery. The part of the third aortic arch that is proximal to the external carotid artery forms the common carotid artery, and the part of the aortic arch that is distal to the external carotid artery forms the internal carotid artery. And also the portion of the dorsal aorta between the third and the fourth aortic arches is called the ductus caroticus, and it will disappear. If it does not disappear, then the internal carotid artery will directly arise from the arch of the aorta. Let me show you how that happens. In this diagram you can see that the first and the second aortic arches have already disappeared, and the third aortic arch, there is outgrowth from it, that is the external carotid artery. It is marked in the pink, so that is the external carotid artery, and proximal to the external carotid artery is the common carotid artery, and distal to the external carotid artery is the internal carotid artery. So that is how the common carotid artery arises and gives divisions to both external carotid and internal carotid artery. And as you can see, the third and the fourth pharyngeal arches are still connected by the dorsal aorta, and that part of the dorsal aorta is called as the ductus caroticus. If it is present even after the adult life, then the internal carotid artery will directly come from the arch of the aorta, so it will not be a branch of the common carotid artery. The dorsal aorta receives arteries that supply the body wall, and one of the many arteries is the 7th cervical intersegmental artery, and it opens at the site of the 4th aortic arch. As we all know, the ventral aorta has fused to become the aortic sac, which is the fused part, and the unfused part is the right and the left horn of the aortic sac. The arch of the aorta is formed from the 3 structures, that is the ventral part of the aortic sac, left horn of the aortic sac, and the left 4th arch artery. and the right horn of the aortic sac forms the brachiocephalic trunk, and on the right side the fourth aortic arch, seventh cervical intersegmental artery and a small part of the dorsal aorta form the right subclavian artery, and the right horn of the aortic sac forms the brachiocephalic trunk, and on the left side the fourth aortic arch forms the major part of the arch of the aorta, and the seventh cervical intersegmental artery on the left side forms the subclavian artery. As you can see in this picture, the ventral part of the aortic sac, the left horn of the aortic sac and the fourth aortic arch on the left side forms the arch of the aorta, and the left subclavian artery arises from the fourth intersegmental artery, fourth cervical intersegmental artery. And on the right side, the right horn of the aortic sac forms the brachiocephalic trunk, and then the fourth aortic arch on the right side along with the seventh cervical intersegmental artery and a small part of the dorsal aorta will form the right subclavian artery. Let's talk about the changes that happen in the sixth aortic arch. So the sixth aortic arch will give rise to the lung bud. As you can see in the picture below, there is a part that is proximal to the lung bud and there is a part that is distal to the lung bud. The lung bud will go to the lung, and also the pulmonary arteries are derived from the sixth aortic arch. Now the proximal part of the sixth aortic arches on both sides will develop into the pulmonary arteries. On the right side, the distal part will disappear, and on the left side it will form the ductus arteriosus. And this ductus arteriosus in the adult life it will degenerate to form the ligamentum arteriosum, but sometimes the ductus arteriosus continues to exist even in the adult life. Then it extends from the pulmonary trunk to the arch of the aorta, and this condition is called patent ductus arteriosus. Now let's talk about the recurrent laryngeal nerve. The left recurrent laryngeal nerve will hook around the arch of the aorta in the thorax region on the left side, and the right recurrent laryngeal nerve will hook around the subclavian artery, right subclavian artery at the root of the neck on the right side. So why has the right recurrent laryngeal nerve migrated to the level of the root of the neck instead of just staying in the thorax? Let's see about that. As we already know, the aorta cannot be there in the right side and the left side in adult. That is why the right dorsal aorta will disappear below the level of the fourth aortic arch, and also we know that the distal part of the sixth aortic arch has also disappeared. Now this gives the right recurrent laryngeal nerve space to migrate up to the level of the neck, and then it hooks around the right subclavian artery. And the right subclavian artery is formed by the fourth aortic arch on the right side, the seventh cervical intersegmental artery and a small part of the dorsal aorta. You can see here that the pulmonary trunk arises from the truncus arteriosus, and the two pulmonary arteries arise from the proximal part of the sixth aortic arch. And on the left side, the distal part of the sixth aortic arch forms the ductus arteriosus, which is the connection between the pulmonary trunk and the arch of the aorta, but it is not present in the adult life. If it continues to exist in the adult life, then the condition is called patent ductus arteriosus. The ductus arteriosus actually degenerates to form the ligamentum arteriosum in the adult life. You can see that on the right side, the distal part of the sixth aortic arch has vanished, and also there cannot be two dorsal aorta, so the right dorsal aorta has vanished from the level of the fourth aortic arch. So this gives the right recurrent laryngeal nerve space to migrate up, so it goes to the region of the neck and it hooks around the right subclavian artery, whereas the left recurrent laryngeal nerve will hook around the arch of the aorta. So this table gives the overview of some of the development of main arteries. So first is the arch of the aorta. The arch of the aorta arises from the left fourth aortic arch along with the left horn of the aortic sac and the ventral part of the aortic sac, whereas the brachiocephalic trunk arises from the right horn of the aortic sac. Then going to the right and the left subclavian artery arises only from the seventh cervical intersegmental artery on the left side, but the right subclavian artery arises from the right seventh cervical intersegmental artery and the right fourth aortic arch and a small part of the dorsal artery. Then going to the common carotid, internal carotid and external carotid. First, the external carotid artery arises as a small outgrowth in the middle of the third aortic arch. The proximal part to that, from there the common carotid artery arises, and the distal part of the third aortic arch to the external carotid artery, that is the place where the internal carotid artery arises. And then the pulmonary arteries arise from the sixth aortic arch, and the descending aorta arises from the left dorsal aorta from the attachment of the fourth arch artery. So thank you for listening to me. I hope this video was useful for you. If you like this video, please like, share, subscribe and comment on it. Thank you.